Hey, everybody. Welcome to MIT versus Caltech. This is Abe McAllister.
And this is Sam Wilkie.
Welcome. Today, we're going to talk about forgiveness. The past isn't dead. It's not even the past.
I'm excited, Abe. I'm excited to hear what you have to say about this.
Yeah, I love that quote because it really speaks to the fact that people are like, oh, that's in the past. And if it's in the past, it wouldn't be on their mind, right? People want to, it's the past isn't dead. As you think about things, you bring your past into your present. And particularly when we talk about forgiveness, we're talking about times that we've been hurt, and it raises the question of why bring that hurt into the present. You know, all we have is the present and what's going to happen. So if that hurt doesn't have any value, why are we bringing it forward? I find forgiveness as a word to describe that process of letting the past go. So it's not filling your present and future. How do you think about that?
Yeah, and I think it's really important to keep in mind that just because you're forgiving someone doesn't mean you're excusing them.
Yeah.
Those are two totally different concepts. I think forgiveness is more for yourself anyway. I used to really hold on to grudges. And to me, it was important if someone upset me that I hold a grudge. And I still think there was value in doing that when I was younger because it would stop me from interacting with that person. So I think there was some value in that. But at this point, I really have discovered that by forgiving people, I'm really freeing up a lot of mental space and emotional space for myself. And it doesn't benefit the person I've forgiven at all. And I think that was something I thought when I was younger is, oh, by forgiving someone, I'm giving them a pass. But you're not. If you're forgiving someone, it doesn't mean you're excusing their behavior or excusing what they've done. So that's a big distinction I have to remind myself of.
Yeah. When in your life, so you said you held grudges, when did you go through this process of being like, oh, those grudges aren't helping me really, other than knowing that I don't want to interact with that person?
Yeah, I have an example, and let me talk through it a little bit. This will take about a minute. So someone who kind of stopped inviting me to their life as much as they used to, who I felt I was good friends with, which had nothing to do with me, I found out later. So this person, I was kind of like upset with them. And I was much younger. Yeah, I was a teenager at the time. And so I held a grudge. And then this person, something kind of horrible happened to them. And then their life was muted. And I'm not going to give specifics because in case this person watches, I don't want there to be any chance that people identify who this person was. So I'm not going to provide you with specific details. But this person's life had taken a harsh turn. And I remember seeing her and just realizing, why would I hold a grudge against another human? And I don't know if cosmically, you know, by holding that grudge that I somehow contributed to their life kind of going in a poor direction for a while. She's now doing great. So kudos to that situation improving. But I think that was the first time I realized, like, ooh, I don't even want to hold grudges in the first place. And then after that experience of, hey, I don't want to hold on to these, I started realizing, oh, I can forgive people. And boy, it was just opening. So I'd say kind of teenage years, late teens is when I started discovering, oh my gosh, you can forgive people. Again, not excusing them. If they've done something horrific, you're not saying it's okay. You're just realizing they're a human and they do things that they do. And so you can forgive what people do without excusing it.
Yeah. I mean, for me, probably the biggest thing that I held on to for a long time was my first business. I started with some other MIT grads. And it was, you know, it was a successful operating business. But yeah, our very first product, our very first delivery, you know, there was the PhD who was kind of the lead, and he's like, could we deliver this in 6 weeks to Lucent? I'm like, I'm gonna have to work 100-hour weeks, but we can do it, and I want a bonus. We put together this product. It was really a lot of effort for me as the primary hardware and API designer. You know, we delivered it to Lucent. They accepted us. They wrote us the $200,000 check for this piece of equipment. And I said, how about my bonus? He's like, oh, I thought you were joking. And that actually was indicative of the relationship, but the real key indicator that things weren't working. And so I left, and that the process of leaving that company was not clean. So really weighed on me, because I had invested a lot of my time and myself into the company, into the product. And it really took, it took years to resolve the situation, and then it took a decade before it wasn't regularly on my mind. Right. So that, for me, that was a long process of, understanding why I was feeling the way I was about various incidents, and why I was holding on to it. And especially since I recognized that there was no value in me holding on to it. I'd learned the lessons about how to listen better, how to be a better communicator in partnerships and business partnerships. There were tons of valuable lessons that came out of it, but kind of the anger and frustration part of it wasn't helping me, and it did weigh on me. So it was a real process to go through, a lot of situations and kind of understand what were essentially miscommunications. Is, how it was the tool I used to kind of come to terms in my own mind, for my own mind to be able to let it go.
Can I ask you something? It might sound trivial to you, but I think there's something here. So you said you didn't want to hold on to the anger, but to me, you probably weren't holding on to the anger. What you were probably doing, I'm guessing, is you were reminding yourself with thoughts of things that upset you. And so then you were feeling anger, but that's not what you were holding on to. You were holding on to these concepts. And these concepts, to me, anger is your friend in that situation, right? So these concepts were upsetting to you. So anger is your friend. Like, hey, man, that's really messed up that this guy did this to you. So anger is actually this great thing, but that's not what you're holding on to. Like, what you let go of is thinking about this stuff, and your anger is still with you whenever you want it, right? Like, anger is still a friend.
So it's really interesting, right? Because there's a lot of lessons I got out of that experience. It was basically a 2.5-year experience, starting a company from scratch, how you lease industrial property, the whole, building a product, selling a product, supporting a product. There were just tons of valuable things in the whole experience. So I think in part of it was even shifting. I think there is an emotional aspect of it, and I actually do think that I've, if not let go of the anger, I've made space for the things I'm grateful for. And I think we might do a whole nother episode on gratitude, right? But gratitude is just this great tool, I think, for shifting perspective. And for me, that was very powerful. So I can still hold on to the memory of events, but I can, like I said, forgiveness is the term I use for making space for gratitude in some way.
Okay. So if I'm hearing you right, Abe, you're in agreement that it's the concepts you were letting go of, not necessarily the anger. And one of the tools you used was forgiveness. And another tool that's heavily linked with forgiveness is this concept of, sorry, my brain just lost it for a second, gratitude. So gratitude helps you forgive. And so that's another tool. Instead of just ruminating over and over about the things that were upsetting, you interrupted that with forgiveness, but then also gratitude was able to shift your perspective to something other than just ruminating over these imagined, whatever you're imagining was upsetting you about that whole situation where he didn't give you a bonus. Did you ever get a bonus?
I don't even know how to describe it. It was a 4-year lawsuit to extract the value of my equity from that endeavor. It's just
okay. Wow, that sounds really intense.
It was intense. I went through that between the age of 22 and 26 or so. So yeah, at the same time, I was, working at other startups and then starting a family. So there was plenty going on, and that prevented me from, I think, processing. Certainly real time as you're going through and learning about the legal system, the fact that in a civil case, people can claim anything, right? And it's not till you actually get to the real litigating of it that claims are resolved to facts by potentially the opinion of juries, consensus of non-experts. So yeah, it was a real lesson. And just the system, you kind of go from being, I'd say, an idealistic young person, and idealistic might even be the wrong word, just the perspective of people should see things my way, to just this idea of people see things all kinds of ways. And that was a big just step forward. It's around the time I stopped using the words should and deserve, because I feel very strongly that there's a lot of randomness, there's a lot of perspective. I think that nobody's fundamentally entitled to things. People develop entitlement is fundamentally a political question. What do we yield to other people? What do other people yield to us? But yeah, so on the topic of forgiveness, I think that it takes time and space and energy to forgive, right? For me, it's not an automatic process. How do you find when you decide not to hold a grudge, is it pretty easy for you to let go, or is there a process you go through?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is I've been retired for so many years, so I'm not in situations with conflict like you are in the work world, perhaps, or in academia. Surprisingly, I found there to be not often, but I would have conflict. And as a retired person, I'm not putting myself in that position, so it's a lot easier for me to say, "Oh, I forgive easily." But again, I think I said this before we started recording. I don't want to throw the younger version of me under the bus. I don't want to suggest that like, oh, the younger version of me held grudges, and so that version is a lesser version, and this older version that doesn't hold grudges, that's not what I'm saying at all. I just find, for me personally, at this stage of my life, I appreciate not holding a grudge. And yeah, usually when people say sorry to me, I don't even need it, because I was like, oh, there's nothing to forgive. Like, I wasn't even upset, because you can rely on a human to be a human, right? Like that's a guaranteed thing. Like, a human's going to act like they're going to act. And so, understanding that humans make mistakes, or humans also do things, and incentive, we haven't even brushed on incentive in this podcast, but I know based on your career choice that we're going to talk about incentive quite a bit. So if people's incentive structures are not aligned with yours, often you get things where it's like, oh, maybe forgiveness is helpful here. But I find I don't even get to that point of needing to forgive, because I don't even get upset. But I'm in a very privileged place, right? Like, I'm not in a career. And in a career, I found I was much more in those conflict of interest zones. So often, sorry, not conflict of interest, but where you have a company. When you first start working for a big company, you think, oh, all these people at the top, all these executives, they get in a room and they come to some sort of consensus. Nothing could be further from the truth. At the top, they're all vying for limited resources.
Yeah.
And so they're all trying to convince the company, hey, we need more R&D money, or we need more marketing, or we need more money for sales, or we need more headcount for our engineers, whatever it is. They all have competing ideas and interests, and they're not all in alignment on like what's the best next steps. I guarantee you it's a bloodbath at Facebook right now. The fact that their stock has plummeted 70% in the last, 12 and a half months, I guarantee it's a bloodbath. People all have different ideas. It's a sinking ship at the moment. I think they'll right the ship, but I'm certain that those high-level exec meetings, there's not consensus. It's just a lot of voices and a lot of confusion, and probably a lot of people getting really upset and not necessarily, like you said, not being able to forgive immediately, because they have to process what are they going through, what are they experiencing, and that's very complex. And it might take years for them to figure out the answers to some of those questions that they're having. So again, I'm in this very privileged place, but I recognize if I was an exec at Facebook right now, I would be experiencing just bloodbaths probably on a daily basis. And when I say bloodbath, I mean just going in and having a lot of conflict and a lot of people throwing you under the bus or vice versa.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things you mentioned there is this idea of perspective, what other people are going through. And that's something that for me definitely developed over time, really being able to, you know, uh, stand back and ask that question of what is the other person going through? What are their incentives? Why are they acting a particular way? And sometimes what did I miss? Right. So I think that whole process of being able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. And so for me, I mean, one of the things that I pay very close attention to is what people say and how that's interacting with what I want to hear. Because in fact, like going back to my very first company, like I wanted a growth company. It was around the .com bubble, but I'm just gonna call him lead partner, wanted a hobby shop, and he actually had made it. He actually had said that. So sometimes you get in these conversations in like a startup where you say, I want it to be this. And I'm like, yeah, I can see that. And then they say, maybe a week later, I kind of see this as a vision of the future, right? But you might be stuck on the week before when they said that they agreed with your vision. But now a week passes and they, maybe they didn't bring up at the time because like you're a more aggressive, outgoing personality who likes to talk, and maybe they're more reserved and they needed to take some time and reflect and be like, no, I should really voice my opinion about what I want the future to look like. And so that for me, and that's something where I forgive myself for making that mistake, right? So this goes back to ruminating. It's very easy to judge one's own past actions negatively, right? And not be a very kind, forgiving person. And that comes up in business, it comes up in relationships, it comes up in parenting. There's lots of ways to be like, I could have done that better for the outcome I think I wanted. And again, you can just really fill up your mind and your time with ruminating, which just doesn't have any positive benefits from a mental health perspective, or usually even from, eventually getting to what you want. So I think that forgiveness is a good tool for, moving forward with other people and moving forward with yourself.
This reminds me of an example. You might know the person I'm talking about. She was a CEO, I think in her 20s, of a very successful company. And one of the things she talked about is how at the dinner table, her father was really interested in her failures for the week. So they at the dinner table, they could talk about their successes, and he would, congratulations, good job. But it was really the failures that he not only wanted to hear about, but was excited about. And what she says that taught her, and I'm sure that people know this story because it's pretty famous. Apologies that I'm not thinking of who this is. But it taught her that if you're trying to get better at something, that failure is such an important piece of that. And in addition to what you're saying, Abe, is that forgive yourself. I think one way to forgive yourself, or not even need to forgive yourself, is to embrace that idea that you're going to make mistakes, especially at things you're trying to get better at. If you're already a wonderful dancer and you go to a dance and you're just doing moves well within your means, you're not going to make any mistakes. But if you're trying to learn to dance, guess what? You're going to make a ton of mistakes along the way. And just like in dance or in sports, or I think a mistake that we all make is in social settings. And that's the one I think we ruminate on more, is like, oh, I shouldn't have said this, or I said this, and yada, yada. Those are the ones at least I ruminate on the most. But forgiving yourself might just be recognizing, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I made those mistakes, because it means I'm trying. And I'm probably learning a lot more from the mistakes than I am from the successes.
I think I think you hit on two things there. One is the failures that happen through learning, and accepting that learning involves failure, and that if you want to keep learning, you're going to keep failing. And I separate that from if you do a lot of things, you're going to fail sometimes. It's just the statistics of doing, right? So like in social situations, I think, I know that this is the case for me. Like I feel adept in social situations. And so when I, put my foot in my mouth, which, happens, I talk a lot, even if I have a 99.9% success rate, it's still going to happen where I embarrass myself. And that's one of those things where you notice those mistakes, and it's still important to forgive yourself, right? It's this whole idea of, if you do a lot of stuff, you're going to fail occasionally, but you have to keep perspective on how much you're doing. I like the book Daring Greatly by Brene Brown. She talks a lot about the Theodore Roosevelt quote, which is all about, you have to keep doing in order to succeed. And some of that doing is going to involve failure, and you have to be okay with that.
And I kind of wish we had 2 words for failure. I think it's kind of a bummer that we just have the one word, because I think we all agree that failing because you're not even trying in the first place is a different flavor of failing versus trying something and failing repeatedly at it as you get better. To me, we're using the same word, but we're using it to describe totally different things, because I think I really want to be in the I'm failing because I'm trying camp, but I don't want to be in the I'm failing because I'm not trying camp, right? Like if you want to be the best tennis player in the world and you never go get tennis lessons, guess what? You're failing, not in the way that I'm talking about, not in the beneficial way. So I kind of wish we had 2 different words, because to me, those are completely different concepts.
Yeah. And then the third word for just, you're doing something that you're normally good at and you're just having a bad day. Yeah, we have some colloquialisms for them, but nothing great, right?
Abe, I wanted to ask you a little bit about, you had talked earlier in this episode about processing, and I think you were referring to processing your emotions. And I think you're also, some people talk about unpacking, like let's unpack that. And they might be talking about emotions, they might be talking about ideas, they might be talking about trauma. But I think we've heard that phrase a lot, like, oh, you need to process your emotions, or you need to unpack, that whole situation with your dad or whatever. Can you talk me through what you mean when you say process your emotions?
So the first is just, what are the events? Do I even recollect the events correctly? I was talking to my mom about this the other day, about something that happened in my past. It's like, this is what I remember. What do you remember? Just to see like what actually happened. That's one thing. And then, what was I going through? What were the other person's incentives or situation? What was their state? Were they having a bad day? Because sometimes, people hurt your feelings with no real intent. It's just they're busy. And this happens, right? I remember my childhood and my parents' divorce, and there were just a lot of things going on that as a child I didn't understand and felt hurtful at the time. But now that I'm adult and I've seen other adult lives and just have perspective on what adults are going through, that it is true that as much as a parent loves their children, they are not always thinking about how they're feeling and focused on them. And so just those kinds of understanding, what was the situation, who was involved, what was my kind of emotional state, what was their emotional state, what was going on for them outside of our immediate interaction. To me, that's a big part of the process. And even the part of the process, like we talked about before, about is this excusable or unexcusable, right? If it's unexcusable, then that informs the I just don't want to interact with this person, or at least I don't want to interact with them in these situations. So for me, the processing is really taking that time and making that space for, reflecting on the circumstance, reflecting on how I reacted, and then just asking the question, like, did I have a reasonable reaction or not?
Okay. So for you, processing, and I come back to, it's not necessarily, it doesn't sound like you're processing the emotions to me as much as you're processing circumstance and things that happened and how you responded and your emotions. So you're processing
I think you've
all of
talked
those
about
things.
the words you use, it right, is that thoughts can generate emotions, right?
Yeah.
That emotions are in response, right? They're a very internal response to your perception and your awareness of what's going on. And I don't think so. Processing so when I say processing, it's processing the thoughts to get to an emotional state that lets me move forward, right?
I see. And for you, that's kind of thinking about all the circumstances, thinking about the things that happened, thinking how you responded to it, thinking, making judgments about the circumstance. Was this excusable? Was this unexcusable? And then also making judgments about your own emotional response to those situations. Is this how I want to respond? Or is this the emotion I want to have in response to this?
That's always important, right? Because ideally, you can forgive quicker, because the being distracted by your emotions usually doesn't help you accomplish the things you want to accomplish moving forward.
And this is kind of where I gently push a little bit is, can you come up with an example from your own experience of some emotions you process? So you did a wonderful job of coming up with an example with the business, and where you worked 100+ hour weeks under the guise that you were going to get a nice bonus, and then that didn't happen, and the guy kind of treated you poorly by saying, "Oh, I thought you were just joking," didn't take you very seriously. So I thought that was a great example. And then while you were talking through processing your emotions, it did sound to me like you were kind of talking through your own experience with your parents. And so I was wondering if you're willing to share a specific example of that.
I can. So, I mean, the one that always comes to mind is after my parents got divorced and my father was dating again. I just remember being in his pickup truck.
Sorry, how old were you at this point?
11.
11? Wow. Okay.
Or 12.
That's,
And
it's a rough age to have your parents divorced, I'm guessing.
the data says any age below, I think 20 something is a bad age.
Okay.
In any case, yeah. So I just remember him saying that he would never marry somebody who didn't love me and my brother. And the woman he ended up marrying when I was 14 hated me and my brother. Just, the wicked stepmother caricature is there for a reason. Kind of, I would say almost supportive of us in public and really like emotionally manipulative in private. So that was a lot to understand. And so it took me a long time to forgive my father. So I basically didn't talk to my father from the time I was 19 until I was 26, because all those interactions just brought up that memory, other memories. And at the time, especially 19, so I was a sophomore at MIT, working very hard, just with studies, and again more focused on what I wanted to get out of school, which was, to really learn as much as I could, to find a spouse, and to start a company, right? Those are the things that I was trying to do at that time.
What are some things that gave you the impression that she hated you?
Oh, it's just that like anything left on the table was a screaming fit. You don't clean up the bathroom because you don't love your father. I mean, just things of that nature I just heard all the time. So yeah.
And she would scream at you?
There's the yelling. I mean, my brother moved back to live with my father and stepmother, and my father is a contractor, and he made my brother a room outside of the house. This is in Vermont. So in order to go to the bathroom, like in the winter, like Vermont, January, February, that's going to be a negative Fahrenheit temperature in the mornings. He had to go out of this room outside and then into the main house. Right. And my father, I'm sure my stepmother insisted on this. And my father's like, oh, he has independence. He has his own space. I'm like, he's 15. Like, what are you doing? Yeah, I mean, really, really intense, kind of clearly bad stuff. And it was very hard on my brother. In my opinion, you never know what's going on in somebody else's mind, but it sure seemed brutal to me. And I could not, yeah, I actually hadn't thought about that in a long time. And I don't think I've formally forgiven my father for letting that happen. Yeah, so things like that.
I didn't even mean to dig in, but it sounds like we got a good one. It sounds like you stopped interacting with your father from the age of 19 to 24?
6 or so.
26. Wow. I mean, a good portion of your adult life. And you just no interactions at all, or just minimal interaction?
0.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, so I think you have more experience than the average person about processing something that you're upset about, and then forgiving. And it sounds like your words, not mine, it sounds like you haven't fully forgiven.
So I mean, it's so I noticed that as I bring that memory into my mind now, I just have anger around it, right? So it's something I haven't thought about in a while.
Which
Go ahead.
Yeah, and I want to come back to this because instead of throwing anger under the bus, to me, anger sounds totally appropriate, right? It's not the anger that's bad. Maybe holding on to this for too long might be unhealthy for you, but anger sounds like the exact healthy response. When you were talking about processing your emotions, you were talking about, well, is this emotion a reasonable response to have? And to me, I don't know much details beyond what you've said, but it does sound like if I was a teenager and someone came into my life who was suddenly screaming at me, I think I would be angry. And I could see myself being like, hey, as long as you're with this person who's choosing to scream at me, I just don't even want to know you. And again, that might be, I might have a lot of feelings, but I think anger would be like a pretty healthy response to
Yeah, the
that,
anger response is fine, but it's not helping me now. I have a
to
relationship
hold
with
on
my
to it.
father where I know how I want that to proceed. I know how to create the circumstance so that I am protected in my thoughts and emotions, while still not there's no value in long-term estrangement. I have very fond memories of my father from my youth that I do want to hold on to. He taught me to read. I love reading. It's one of my favorite memories, sitting in my father's lap when I was, 3 or 4, and him going like, let's play a home magazine. I just remember him going like, I just remember like learning the word home. And we had this, he built the house we lived in when we grew up, and it had a great westerly facing window in the living room. So it was just this bright, sunny afternoon. And it just, that's something that I found joy in. And my father is a warm, charismatic person, not necessarily the best decision maker on several fronts. I've decided as an adult, but there are plenty of things that he loves me. He loves my brother. The decisions he makes, in my estimation, are poor. So, it's like a lot of life. It's complicated, and what we're talking about today is this idea of forgiveness, and a little bit we talked about gratitude as tools to move forward. Right, the past doesn't exist, so I think you have to be really careful about what you're holding on to and why. This goes back to being deliberate.
Talk me a little bit through the past doesn't exist.
Yeah, it doesn't. So, right, I mean, the only thing that exists right now is right now, and the only thing we have to look forward to is the future. You can draw on your past for learning, and we do that all the time, but I think people overemphasize the past. They get really caught up in the way things have been, the things that have happened, and especially when those things aren't indicative of the future, I think you have to let them go.
Yeah, I think you're pointing out that even though the past has consequences on the present. So if you squish an ant, the ant is no longer here. So that past had huge consequences for that ant. So you're not saying there's no consequences from the past, but you're just saying the past doesn't exist, and it plays no necessarily any relevance to dwell on it unless there's some sort of takeaway or learning. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, but I would say more strongly that in a lot of ways, the past doesn't matter. And does, I mean, this is the whole idea of, let's say we're in a simulation and it just got switched on, like right now. So everything that we think is the past, literally, just plugged in, right? Didn't even actually happen. What do we want the future to look like? Like if we had the clean slate, what would we do right now? Because we know a lot about, there's a lot of things that have happened in history that create a state that people are constrained by, that they feel they have to move forward within. On that note, I think we'll wrap this one up. Thank you so much for your time and thoughts, and thanks to our audience for listening.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Abe, for sharing about a couple of your big experiences in life. I feel like that was a window into some part of your experience, and both of those sound like fairly devastating events. So I think you have a lot to share on this, how to process and forgive and see things with gratitude and in a different lens. So thank you for sharing all that.
Yeah, I'm happy to. It has helped me, and hopefully it'll help somebody else.